Welcome back. The Great Salt Lake isn't the only shrinking salt lake in the western United States. As we look at ways to save our critical resource here in Utah, the Great Salt Lake Collaborative sent a team to California to find out what's been learned when saline lakes have dried up in the past. What they found could change how you see the shrinking Salt Lake. Dan Spindle has more.
I hope you don't have to do this.
13 years of siphoning water to Los Angeles left Owens Lake completely dry by 1926. For years, storms whipped up the dry, dusty lake bed laden with harmful metals. 40,000 people living in the Owens Valley suffer the health effects. And the dry lake earned the title of largest source of dust pollution in U.S. history.
It would block out the sun. It was, like a real bad forest fire.
We had to stop the kids playing outside, and I don't know what it did to their lungs, but I'm sure it wasn't good for them.
Owens Lake once covered about 100 square miles in the mountains of Southern California, but compare that to the size of the Great Salt Lake, which, thanks to the shrinking lake levels, already has 800 square miles of its lake bed exposed, 8 times the size of what Owens Lake left behind. And the disaster looming for our drying lake could be that much bigger as well.
It's not a simple solution, and it's very expensive. And, the bigger the area, the bigger the problem, the more challenging it is to fix it.
It's taken 20 years of mitigation, but today managers say they've reduced the lake's toxic dust by 99%. The cost to Californians, a mere $2.5 billion. Imagine the cost to Utahns if we find ourselves suffering the same fate.
You can double your crews, you can double your trucks, you can double your project size, and you just keep multiplying. It just costs more and more and more and more.
There's no end in sight, and there's no limitation to what our ratepayers have to be responsible for.
California has seen some success in its attempt to save another salty lake. Mono, 150 miles north of Owens Lake, was headed in the same direction as river water was diverted to L.A., and then advocates stepped in.
Mono Lake was at the forefront of realizing that if we don't manage water well and give the environment and birds and wildlife and places that people like to recreate a seat at the table, you're not going to have a state that's where you want to live, and you're going to have a lot of ecological problems, air quality problems, and all the things as well.
In a first-of-its-kind legal argument, they convinced the state's Supreme Court to affirm the lake's right to exist. And Los Angeles was forced to scale back its water diversions until Mono's waters returned to a sustainable level. Now the question is, could the same be done to turn the tide on the Great Salt Lake?
The people in LA very much said, I don't want to be responsible for destroying Mono Lake. That's not how I want to get my water. That was part of why we did reach a solution at Mono Lake, I think, because the public, interest was there to figure something out.
Public interest is something the shrinking Great Salt Lake is beginning to see. Utahns are starting to conserve. Entire cities now cutting back by the billions of gallons. And after delegating $500 million for water savings during the last legislative session, there is some optimism that Utah lawmakers will do even more next time around.
I'm seeing all of the state agencies that work on the lake coming together. I'm seeing environmental lawyers, water lawyers, jumping to the table. People in water resources are starting to really care. So that gives me optimism. Everybody wants to work together on this.
It was collaboration and compromise that helped turn things around for our sister saline lakes in California. Now the clock is ticking on the time that we have left to come together to save our lake from becoming an environmental and ecological disaster.
We are at the tipping point for this ecosystem.
Knowing and experiencing the challenges of something that has got to the point at Owens, I would do anything within me to try to assure that didn't happen elsewhere.
We've got to turn this around quickly. We've got to turn this around really quickly.
That Salt Lake, you guys are just potentially beginning.
The good news for Great Salt Lake is that there's still a lake. Not all is lost.
I'm Dan Spindle, KSL 5.
Wow, well, it is easy to see there is a lot we have to lose if the Great Salt Lake turns to dust. All week, the Great Salt Lake Collaborative will have more reports on the lessons learned in California, as well as the failures they found along the way, as we all look for solutions to save the shrinking Salt Lake. You can find those updates and more on KSLTV.com and at GreatSaltLakeNews.org.